Okay, so my question about India and like the culture that's surrounding it is how has mythology affected modern day Indian culture? Now, my original answer that I thought was it hasn't because it's thousands and thousands of years old because it surrounds from Hindu, which is one of the oldest religions out there. So I thought it didn't have any relevance to modern culture. I thought that modern day India would be the exact same as it is for Americans. We focus on improving, we focus on making ourselves better, which is improving. But it's also about changing things to make them. It's just changing. It's applying change to either the person or the body of government or the royal lineage if you're like in a country like UK or maybe India or Japan or areas like that. It's all about change. And I thought that these stories had been retold thousands upon thousands of times the exact same way. So with that, they hadn't changed. Nothing changed them. They changed nothing. They were just stories. Now, the stories might be true or not, but inside of them, there's still some pretty cool ones. For example, on culturetrip.com, there is a list of 8 fascinating stories that they found. One of which I found was really cool was the story of Madhavi, who is a female, I wouldn't say god, I wouldn't say demigod, I'd say human, a female human in mythology who apparently only gave birth to male children, and yet these males became warriors, which is cool. And she has the weird power of restoring virginity, which is awkward. But no, it's the fact that birthing males and making them warriors, I think that's sort of a influence, not a change. It's influencing that the people, that men who are born into Indian culture, when they grow up, you have to be strong, you have to be filled with honor, and you have to have pride. And I think that sort of created that influence. Now, today, based on that, it's a bit different because, as we all know, feminism is a very true thing. Now, it might not be as prominent in India as, per se, the US, where a lot of revolutions and social changes are prominent, but it still exists. For example, there are many times, in fact, that's one example of females, but recently with the feminist movements here, it's moved on to India. And so BBC did a very cool piece on the ancient myths and mythologies of India being kind of changed and rewritten to modern day standards, which kind of brings me back to that change aspect because as I originally thought, they didn't change. They were just stories. Like, it's stories that grandparents tell their grandkids, so on and so forth for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But now, there are stories of, feminism being popular, of modern society, of those ancient societies being changed to fit the worldview. And that's cool. That's nice. And it's still important because what we have today is very, very different from what we would have had when these myths, I'd say, were first being created. But it's also a bad thing, I would say, because, well, you're changing something. Now, if it's a normal idea of just give the women more power, make them more powerful, make them as strong as the men who are said to be warriors, who are virtuous and honorful and brave, and all that stuff. If it's making them the same, then yes, perfectly fine, love it, it's amazing. But when you take it a bit too far, because there are radical feminists. Now, luckily, that has not affected the mythology, but it still exists. And there could come to a point when somebody takes something too far, it can be bad. Like, if radical feminists were to say, women are the only species on Earth that deserve to be treated above everybody else. Men are nothing. Okay, that's a bit too much. Just a little bit too much. Because, sure, women can now get the same jobs as men. But it's also the other thing of there are some jobs that physically men will be better at. Because unfortunately, naturally, women are born sometimes are born smaller and slightly weaker, but that doesn't mean all women are. Some women are bodybuilders, and that's awesome. But it's also the fact that there are physical labor jobs out there that will hire most likely men instead of females due to the understanding of actual physical strength. But that's a change that happened. And if you're rewriting a mythology to that, still a slight bit too much. Now, if you're just so instead of for change, instead of making one power higher and the other power lower, raise the other power to that level. Make them equal. That's the right way to do things. Because if you make them equal, it's easier. So, and that's change. But it's also the change of the storytelling, as I said. Because as I've learned through my love of mythology and my interest in any of it, be it Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Japanese, Indian, Aztec, American, it's a story. But with stories, they change. Now, I've believed for almost all my life that most mythologies stayed kind of the same for their life. They didn't change, they didn't adapt, they were just stories. They were told, you might have changed something to maybe prove a point, because there are morals sometimes, but they exist. And a few more, just to give you an example from that Culture Trip website. There was a curse. Curses are very popular in Indian mythology. There was one where a hunter had went out and killed a bird, and its partner, so he killed a male bird, and the female bird died from sorrow. So with that, a poet named Valmiki placed a curse on this hunter that he would also suffer from in this sort of same fate. And with that, he was approached by the Lord at the time, Lord Brahma, and he was told to write this story about this curse that he had created, which became the poem Ramayana. It's a hard word to say. But then there's also the other popular, and there are many popular tales out there. But there's another one of Shesanaga, who is a serpent said to have supported the planets of the universe, which is awesome. But mythology is cool because it explores so many different things and it touches on so many different aspects. For example, using Greek, because that's my primary, there's gods of love, there's gods of war, there's gods of forging, there's gods of lightning, water, death. There's gods for a lot of stuff. But in Indian mythology, it's not necessarily dealing with the gods. It's primarily dealing with extraordinary people. And with that, these people are sort of changing how their stories are being told. So in thehindu.com, which is a great website, they did an article on how ancient mythology is being translated into modern avatars. And they said that a lot of the time, the stories that are being told of this mythology are changing. People are rewriting them to either change a moral, or change the person, or just change the way that it worked. And that was confusing to me at first, because I, as I've said, always believed in, what? No, mythologies don't change. That's stupid. Well, apparently they do. And so it's that sort of thing of they do change. Because there is a thing known as the public domain. And the public domain, I'm not going to get too deep into this since it's not important, basically determines what can be changed or not. And since these stories are thousands and thousands of years old, they're going to be changed, whether by um, a, by a small family in India potentially just changing the story to teach a lesson to their young kids, or potentially by the Lord Himself at that time. It's these stories that are adapted and changed and turned modern, which is nice because it's unfortunate, but a lot of models and character traits that were present in the past don't really exist in the future because there's a thing called honor. That doesn't really happen here. There's a thing called bravery that only really exists in like certain jobs. There's a thing called character itself, having character. A lot of people don't have that in this day and age. So I think by adapting these stories to the modern cultures, it's good. It's impressive. And it helps teach people what's needed. It helps show people that, hey, these traits existed and they were good and they helped and they were a nice thing to have. Try and learn it. And I think that's what starts it off for people. It's taking your traits that you've got and just going. Not thinking, not even personally attempting, just doing. It's taking honor and truth and justice, maybe, I don't know, and applying those into day-to-day life. And that's nice. And another thing is that with these mythologies, with this mythology specifically, it tells of many things. It tells of creation, it tells of monsters, it tells of destruction, it tells of demons. There's many things in there that exist. And the amazing author of mythology, Devdutt Patanaik, wrote a book talking about how the symbolism that exists in mythology is now shaping modern day, which I think it should. Because learning from, as humans have done for millennia, learning from the past will help the future. And that's important and very helpful. And he said to the question of the relevance of mythology in this, there is no one mythology for the world today or for the future. Different people will have their own mythology, reframing old ones and creating new ones. And that's I think the important part in how mythology has potentially changed. It's not that these stories have like come to life and are true and there are examples of them out there. No, it's the traits that are shown through these characters have to be exhibited in the real world. And that's change. That's the change that I think needs to happen. It's taking a story, maybe changing it, maybe adapting it, maybe making it better, or maybe making it suit a purpose, and telling it and letting it flow. Letting it naturally build and build until it becomes true. And then this story is passed on. And it continues and continues and goes. And this story is eventually told. Someone takes what they've learned and applies it. And then that person becomes better. They tell why they've become better. People learn and people adapt. Because stories affect people. Every person has at least read a book of some kind. And most of the time when you read that book, it made you feel something. If it's like an action book, it made you feel excited and energized and want to like tackle the day and full of energy. Or if you read a very tragic book, it makes you cry. It makes you feel sad and it makes you wonder. And then there are dark books dealing with death and life, and they're very depressing. But a book is a book, and sometimes books will have morals. The same with mythology stories. They affect humans, which I think is the most important part. So to answer my question, how does mythology shape modern culture? It does not shape modern culture. It shapes modern people, who in turn shape the culture. Thank you.